Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. Today, we have Deborah Heiser, which is a PhD in developmental psychology. And she's been on TEDx speaker. She's a consultant, an author, founder of the Mentor Project, which is kind of how you're all wondering, well, how do we get a psychologist onto leadership? And we're going to talk today a little bit about mentorship and how psychology might intersect a little bit with leadership. With that, we're super excited to have you here, Deborah. I will kick it over to you. You want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to psychology and mentoring?
Sure. Thank you for having me on your show. I'm delighted to be here. I didn't start out wanting to be a psychologist. I happened into it. My grandmother was depressed and I didn't know what was making her grouchy. And someone said, we're going to fix her. So I went to visit her a couple months later and she was fixed,
Wow.
Meaning that she was not depressed anymore. So I said, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. Go out and fix grandmas. So I changed my whole trajectory and went on to pursue psychology. And my thinking with psychology was that it's all pathology, that it's all fixing things that are wrong with us. So when I first went out to work, I was researching everything no one ever wants to have or get, like frailty, Alzheimer's disease, depression, all of those kinds of things, without realizing that really we have so much to look forward to, and we're built to really do well in life and to be happy in life and to succeed. And so I switched what I was looking at and really wanted to focus on what we can look forward to. And part of that is a midlife emotional developmental stage called generativity. And in that is a desire to give back to others without expecting anything in return. And the way that most people understand this is if you've seen the movie Scrooge, and that's the Charles Dickens A Christmas Carol, where he's the self-made guy who has a mansion, made his own career, has servants taking care of all of his needs, but he's miserable. And then as soon as he starts to help others, Tiny Tim and Bob Cratchit, he becomes happy. That's just how it is in our real life. And we can get that through philanthropy, volunteering, and mentoring. And I decided to focus on mentoring, particularly in how we interact with others and connect with others. Because it's giving a piece of ourselves to somebody else. It's a little bit different than philanthropy and volunteering, which is driven by someone outside of ourselves. Mentoring is driven by ourselves, and that can be something within the workplace. It can also be our culture, our value. It can be religion that gets passed down from centuries. That's through mentorship. So mentoring is super comprehensive, and most of us overlook it and don't take it into account in our work or personal development. And it's a huge buffer for negative outcomes later. Those who are connected and mentor live longer, healthier, happier lives.
Interesting. I've never thought about it that way, but the whole reason I started a leadership and consulting business was so that I had the opportunity to give back all the things that I've learned over the past 30 or 40 years. And I never really thought about it till you just said it, but, I just recently said, I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. But maybe a piece of that is I'm just enjoying being able to give back and have that relationship with people. The other piece that kind of hit me as you were talking about mentorship, how can mentorship, or how would you compare it? What are the differences, rather, of mentorship and apprenticeship? And how do they tie together?
That is a form of mentorship. We understand apprenticeship And that really is when we think about mentoring, how it was really brought about into the way that we learn things. But we don't have that many apprenticeships anymore that are the way that they used to be. So mentorship now takes on the way that mentorship looks now is, if I were to define it for you, it requires like 5 ingredients that are kind of like if you were to bake brownies, and if you left something out like sugar, it'll look like brownies, but it won't taste like it.
Yeah.
In mentorship, it's similar. We need a generative component, like I mentioned, giving back without expecting something in return. But it's not just the mentor that we need to focus on, it's the mentee also. That mentee has to want to take what is being given back. So if I say, hey, Amos, I'd love to give some math information to you, and you say, ew, I hate math, I don't want that. It's not going to work. You have to be receptive to accepting what I want to give. Just like in an apprenticeship, if an apprentice is there with the master carpenter or whoever, and they don't want to do that, it's not going to work. So the next thing is that it has to be intrinsically motivated. So a lot of people think you can get paid to be a mentor, and really that's completely not the case. You could be a coach, you could be an advisor, you could be all kinds of other things, but it's not a mentor. So the example I like to give for that is, if I said, hey, Amos, would you like to go volunteer at a soup kitchen? You might say, yeah, sure, I would get a lot out of that. I'd feel good about myself and I would enjoy that. And if I said to you, instead, you know what, don't go to the soup kitchen, go to Starbucks and volunteer your time. You're giving out food and beverage to hungry, thirsty people there. That has a whole different feel to it. And most people don't go volunteer their time at Starbucks. They will at a soup kitchen. They feel great afterwards. That feel is what makes the difference for mentorship, is the one that's intrinsically motivated. You would do it for no pay and feel great about it. If you're getting paid for it, it has that extrinsic feel to it. And if somebody says, now go mentor on top of, whatever you're getting paid for, it feels like exploitation instead. So the next layer to that is a meaningful connection. You have to like your mentor. Before we got on the show, you were talking about, well, what if people are paired up and they don't really like people? And somebody says, hey, Amos, you're now going to be mentoring Jim, and you don't really like Jim. Jim doesn't really like you. It's not going to work. You have to both like each other. And it's as simple as if you meet a friend or someone that comes into your life and you say, you know what, that's not my person. They're a great person, but I don't really mesh with them completely. That doesn't mean that it's a failure. It means that's not your mentoring partner. That's all. So there has to be a meaningful connection. You also have to trust the person. So if you are a boss at work and you think that you'd like to mentor somebody, but you feel like they're going to steal your ideas and go run away with it, then that's not going to be a good mentoring relationship. Likewise, if you're a mentee and you feel like I don't trust the person above me because if I tell them I don't know something, I'm going to get a bad performance eval, or they're not going to promote me because they're going to know my weaknesses. You have to be able to show your vulnerabilities to your mentor and your mentee. And finally, you have to have a goal. If you're just chit-chatting, it's not mentoring. That goal can be a one-off, I need help right now, or it can be that you have a twisty, turny goal that changes with all that you're doing over time. So mentorship is really quite simple if we think about it. We engage in this constantly all the time without even thinking about it. You don't go choose a friend, for example, that you say, ooh, that's a shady person, they're going to throw me under the bus the first chance they get. We weed this out. We find people that match all of these things. We don't even think about it. But we all of a sudden, I find with work or other places, people say, well, give me the steps to be a good mentor or mentee. Do I need to listen? Well, that's something that you don't ask yourself that about friendship or things like that. You, of course, should listen. Like if some person comes over to you and is telling you something, you shouldn't be checking your phone. And that's just common sense. So mentorship is not a special, mysterious thing. It's stuff we're built to do. We're built to interact this way. It's no different than forming friendships. It's really developing a meaningful connection.
So to back up, and I'm taking notes because I just realized maybe I've been doing this wrong. So I can't just go into a room and force the information I have on all the people in the room and consider that to be mentorship. You're suggesting that doesn't work?
You say that, but I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and they've said, I am ready to mentor, as though they're going to go and like have some kind of big, powerful moment. And they're not thinking of the other person carrying that information. They're just thinking of putting that information out. And we have to think of the recipient and what they're going to be doing with that. That mentee is a very important part of it all. So yeah, no, you're right.
Sorry, couldn't help it.
No,
so is there such a thing for a leader that maybe they're the business owner and they're running day-to-day operations? And is there such a thing as a mentorship frame of mind? So if you're not going to mentor everybody, because you can't, that we've established that maybe you don't get along with them, maybe they're just not the right person, but still, can you have a culture of mentorship, or a mental idea that I should be leading with mentorship in mind? What are your thoughts on that?
100% yes.
Okay.
Now, first of all, so here's who does this perfectly: the tech community. They are masters at this impactful form of mentorship. And it's because, and entrepreneurs do this really well as well, especially people who don't have someone to look to their, above them for help. They have to look next to them, to their left or to their right, and find people who can mentor them. And that leads to a continued culture of mentorship where people are seeking help and seeking advice and looking for help. And people will also ask for help very readily. So yes, that is an amazing culture to have. You will see productivity and creativity explode if you have that form of mentorship mindset in your workplace.
Awesome. So now I'm listening to this podcast and I'm thinking, this sounds great. I'm a mentee or want to be a mentee. The business I work at sucks. The manager is terrible. What am I going to do? How do I find a mentor? What are your suggestions?
You look to your left and you look to your right. Most of the amazing mentors that people get in the workplace are not above them, but they're people in other departments, or they're what I call lateral mentors, people with an expertise in something different from what we have. They're at the same level, but they have a different level of expertise. So if I'm a hardware engineer and I say, oh my gosh, I've hit a wall at what I can do with what I'm doing, I am not going to tell my boss I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not going to tell anybody above me I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to look and say, hey, Jim, software guy, can you help me? I need some help, or someone with a different area of expertise that I'm looking for. And you know what? Everybody at work wants to help each other. We're built to want to be helpers. Even if we don't think it's going to enhance our career, we will say to ourselves, you know what? That's a non-threatening thing to help somebody in a different department. They're not trying to take my job. They're not trying to take credit for something. People will give this away willingly and accept the help willingly as long as it's lateral. So I would say if you have a job that you don't love, get your support and show your vulnerability laterally. And that's how you'll get great mentorship.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, one of the things that we've heard over the past several years are businesses that are struggling with all of the generations that are out there. And, specifically my generation, thinking about working with millennials. And, I think everybody's heard some story. Well, the millennials don't want to work. Well, the next generation, they don't see things the way we see things. And that's been going on forever, right? I mean, this isn't something new. Every generation thinks they're the better generation to some extent. Does mentorship help facilitate knowledge sharing across generations?
Oh, absolutely. Look, if I'm in an advertising agency and I'm going to take a boomer's advice on what a 20-year-old wants to buy, I'm going to do badly. We need to get everybody at the table to get the different perspectives. And that is mentorship, understanding culture, values, ways of thinking are all things that are needed in any company and in any job. That different perspective is what is helpful. And so if you are thinking, you know what, my perspective is the only perspective, which, like you said, the greatest generation thought that boomers were lazy. Boomers thought Gen X was lazy. Now Gen X is like millennials are lazy. It's like this, it's a self-focused thing that stops creativity and stops impact. So if you can get two people to talk about a topic, get lateral mentorship on whatever it is. If I'm trying to sell Q-tips to a certain demographic, I would get people from multiple generations at the table to give their thoughts on that. And that would be a form of lateral mentorship to bring those values, the culture, that sort of thing that most people leave out of the equation. It's the psychology and the emotional side of things that often get left behind. And that's incredibly important because whenever we have a company, the culture and the value is what guides everything. It isn't necessarily just the work ethic. And so you will have a poor work ethic if you have people who say, you know what, I'm not heard or seen, or I don't understand why they do that. It makes everyone understand everybody's point of view.
Excuse me, I just mentioned this, I think, in a recent podcast, but I have a book here in the office. It's called the Plant Executive's Desk Book from 1952. And I found it at a thrift bookstore, and I saw it and I thought, I got to buy this because, being a leadership coach and a consultant, the difference from 1952 till today is huge, because this book basically, when it gets to managing people, it tells you tell them you're the boss and they need to do it no matter what. And that was how it was done in 1952. And today we can't do that anymore, and nor should we. But I think, what people need to understand is every single generation has good things to offer, and we have to figure out how to unlock those. And I think sometimes leaders look at that as weakness, like I'm letting them, in on something, or, I don't want to give more information than I need to. So when you're dealing with people that are kind of running against those barriers, what would be your advice to them?
My advice is always to include more and connect more. So most people operate in a silo, right? And we're taught and trained to do that from an early age. Gone are the days of civic engagement. It is now create a brand for yourself and be the independent person that climbs the ladder. Check all the boxes along the way. When people get to the workplace, they continue with that. Nobody is looking to connect because they're thinking, I've got to just stay in my lane and get myself up where I'm going to go. And as soon as that can be moved in a new direction, which is laterally, like it's not flattening, it's keeping the trajectory going up and down, but moving to the sides. I'm going to give you an example of how this works really well and has for a long time, even, from the beginning of our country. The military operates in a hierarchical format. We all understand that, right? There's the ranks. When there's a time of crisis, those walls come down and everyone looks laterally. If there's ever a crisis, all of those barriers that keep those silos, the walls of the silos up, they come down and everybody's looking to the other disciplines. They're looking outside of their area. And that ends up being something that they get all their new ideas from. They make their new strategies. When it becomes a stable, sort of crisis-free environment, then those walls go back up and hierarchical goes up. Companies can operate the same exact way. And that can be one of those solutions that people can come to if they really have an organization that's hierarchically focused. that, you know what, there are times that we can reduce that. So if people are in there in a very rigid format, it does not mean it has to always remain like that.
Reminds me of a great story I heard, and I honestly don't remember where I heard it, but in history, George Washington, when he was first made the commander of the Continental Army, they were preparing for battle and needed to build a barricade, and George Washington rides up on his horse, and he says to a young man standing there, "It looks like they need some help. Why don't you pitch in?" And the young man said, "Oh, I can't do that. I'm a corporal." And so General Washington got down off of his horse and threw his jacket to the side and helped the men. And it's obvious that the corporal had no idea that this was General Washington. And when he was done, the corporal made some comment to George Washington saying, who should I attribute this help to? And he just grabbed his jacket and said, "You can tell the men that General Washington was here to help them in any way that he can." And of course, the corporal felt terrible after he realized that the general of the Continental Army just came and jumped right in and helped. But I think the example you gave just reminded me of that story and how valuable it is that there are times that we should all pitch in.
Yeah, exactly. Your example is 100% accurate. If we think of ourselves as a station or a title, or have our identity so entrenched in this is my job and what I am to do, and you can't see beyond that, it creates a very stagnant environment. And so what you just described was that lateralization of something that was very hierarchical. He got back up on his horse and off he went, still the general.
Yep. I also knew an executive at a construction company, but on his business card, his title was employee. And he purposely did that. When people would say, you have a business card, he'd hand it to them. And many people commented about it. But his point was, I am an employee of the company and I'm here to help. I don't need a title other than employee. And so kind of the same thing. So changing gears slightly, you have what is called the Mentorship Project. You are the founder of that and are still running it on a day-to-day basis. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. It's the Mentor Project, and it is an organization that really formed organically. I was looking at mentorship and really trying to understand why people mentor. Back when I was looking at this, mentorship was talked about a little, got kind of hijacked by the corporate environment, and it lost its definition a little bit. It kind of got expanded to encompass different things. So I really wanted to understand the mentor, because everyone talked about the mentee, and they'd say, go find a mentor. But this mentor was a nameless, faceless individual. And nobody could tell me what the mentor got out of anything. They could all tell me what the mentee got. But what was this? Was this person just like some, individual that was so altruistic? Because nobody can become that, that they're just so selfless. So I talked to about 45 people, from four-star generals down to grandmas, and they all had the same thing. Most of them cried when they told me the stories of how they felt about mentoring and the impact that made on them. And when I met Bill Cheswick, he was the first person who said to me, "Hey, I'm getting ready to retire." Bill Cheswick is one of the fathers of the network firewall, which is how we do all of our communication nowadays, is through the internet and other ways in which we can safely communicate with others and do banking and other things. So he was getting ready to leave Bell Labs, and he was going to move to a farm. And he said, "I have no access to anyone to mentor." And I thought, my goodness, this guy's like famous as an internet security guy, and he can't find a mentee. And he said, "I really want to get in front of kids before they become jaded and think they can't do math and science." So we decided to start the Mentor Project with just a couple of people so we could get Bill into schools. I had no other agenda than to sort of do the administrative work to make sure that this happened. And I was curious to see what this would look like in real life. The theory says one thing, the research says one thing, but what does it look like if you put it into real practice. So we were running around, about 10 of us, the original founders of the Mentor Project, before it became a company, and having a blast. And people said, no one's ever going to join you guys. Anybody who is the top 1% is going to, in their area of expertise, is going to be too busy. They're going to be above this. And so I was like, oh, all right. So I said, fine, we'll just be the 10 of us running around doing our thing. But then COVID hit, and we went from 10 to 60 to 80 to 100 within less than a year.
Wow.
And so the first 60 were in 6 months. I thought I was going to lose my mind because there were so many people saying, I want to mentor. And we have astronauts. We have people who've done world-changing things as part of our Mentor Project. One woman has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize 6 times. So we have all these individuals who are exactly who I was told would never want to mentor because they were above it. Sort of like your George Washington example. But these guys all said, I want to give back. So we're 5 years old, and just this past year in 2024, we gave away more than $3 million of mentorship hours to students in 5 countries. And to me, that shows that people are built to want to give back. Those nameless, faceless individuals that we say, go find a mentor, they're everybody. Everybody wants to give. I don't ever have to say, hey, knock on doors and say, hey, who wants to mentor? The mentors are saying, give me more. And they're not all retired. I found out that it's not just retirees. It's people who are younger, who are in high-level positions, who still want to give, even though they have incredibly busy work days. So the Mentor Project really is there to serve students, kindergarten through any level of schooling. You can be 36 and getting your master's or PhD or whatever. And our mentors have helped students start their own companies. One mentor is helping one student with their dissertation for their PhD, to do something innovative with AI. We have an artist who travels to Tanzania. He's gone there 2 years in a row to provide Western art to the community who's never done cartooning or Western art. He's now in Brooklyn this week, working with students there. So we really try to get out there and reach students who would normally not have access to these really high level mentors and change the trajectory of lives out there.
That is awesome. And I think it kind of leads me, as I'm thinking about this, you've been quoted in the New York Times, Seattle Times, Dallas Times. You've been on TEDx talks. What do you feel is the mentorship's role in shaping societal values and our culture going forward? What kind of impact? And I'll take it a step further, even for those of us everywhere that maybe aren't involved with your program, how much of an impact can we have by taking time and giving back to students of any age? How big of a role is that?
It's enormous. We do this for free. So everything we do is free 100% for students. We get to make an impact in terms of culture, in terms of values, and in terms of not just furthering the wheel of people's knowledge and skills and expertise, but values. When a person is mentored and they feel heard and seen and valued by somebody, they want to go do it. It's really fostering connection. And this transcends politics. This transcends religion. This transcends geographic location. This transcends, SES, social economic status. We're able to make sure that people are connecting across all those lines. And when you see and hear from people, whether you're a mentor and working with someone that you've never worked with before, like Justin, he lives in California, and he went to Tanzania, and he said it was life-changing for him. And so we're learning, our mentors are learning from our mentees and vice versa. And it makes our world smaller, but more meaningfully connected. And that is, I really think, a movement that we can have that costs nothing. And it's something we're built to do. And if we're doing it in our companies, we can do it in our personal lives, and we can really make the world what we want to see in the world.
So out of all of these experiences, what is the most valuable lesson that you have learned from a mentor in your own life?
I've had a lot of mentors. My grandfather was my very first mentor, and I'd say that he kicked it off for me. I used to, and I talk about this in the book, The Mentorship Edge, which I wrote about. And I talk about a lot of different examples of mentoring, but he was my first mentor that I recognized as a mentor. And I was the oldest grandchild, and he would take me in his car down the street to run all of his errands. And I never knew what my grandfather did. He was just like a really big, loud guy who would take me out on his errands with him. And as he would do that, he would tell me stories about people that we passed on the street. He'd say, you see Mary over there? She's got a hard life. She's on her way to go, to the dry cleaner to drop stuff off. But, she's worked and put her kids through college and, go on and on. So I thought, well, maybe he knows all these people. I really doubt it. But what he was telling me was that everyone has a story. And he would tell me this every week. Everyone you see that you pass has a story that isn't maybe what you see on the outside. And that really resonated with me. I never looked at another person as just a face. I mean, I'm a psychologist now. He had an impact on me that really made a difference. And that was something that most people don't think, that a grandparent or someone can have that kind of power over somebody, but he did. And that lasted through my life.
So as we're going into the future, technology is continuing to change lives in good ways, bad ways. There are new things coming out all the time. We have AI. Can AI be my mentor?
Yes. And what you're doing right now is a form of mentorship. I gave those 5 components. These are a little bit weaker because you don't have that meaningful connection. Oftentimes there can be a one-way meaningful connection. So you're doing a podcast. If it's landing meaningfully with someone, you have a sort of a one-way meaningful interaction there. You don't know the person, but you are saying, I'm giving out my information to you. And if somebody's saying, I've been waiting for this information, and they grab it, that's modern mentoring, as I call it. I talk about that in the book, and I talk about AI. Marshall Goldsmith, who is a well-known coach, he decided to make an AI bot of himself that essentially mentors other coaches. It is set up so that it answers all of their questions in his voice. And it's like his little body, his body is there, and you can see that through AI. That's a form of mentorship. So, when the term mentor was coined, actually mentor was a person back in its earliest definition. We can see that as we change and grow and technology becomes more part of our life, how mentorship can grow with that. We are now, technology is adding to our connectivity and our ability to make impact and make mentorship easier for us. So yes, AI is our mentoring friend, as is the tech that you're using for podcasting. You're a modern mentor. Others are modern mentors. Most of us just don't know how often we mentor. And if we could acknowledge that, it would give us the opportunity to feel good about ourselves.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's a unique perspective. So as we're coming to a close, I have 2 questions that I ask every guest. The first one is, what is your go-to book throughout life that you have continually read, reread, and go back to?
I have a couple. And I love books in general, and I love like nonfiction and leadership books. My first book that I've read several times was Marie Curie. She was like an innovator.
Yeah.
She was like the OG techie. Like I just loved reading about her because she did her own thing and she really changed the lives of so many people. And I remember being 12 at the same time and reading Siddhartha and rereading that over and over again and looking at this person who had that sort of circular view of life. So, those are two go-tos. I haven't thought about other books, that I could probably add to that list, but those are the ones that come to my mind that I've read throughout my life over and over.
Awesome. And the last question is, what is your favorite piece of technology today?
I would say my phone. Because it has my computer on it and it has my ability to connect with everybody. I can see them on it. I can talk to them on it, and I can do my work from it if I need to.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. I just thought about it recently that, in 1998, when I entered the workforce, what the workforce was then, as, coming in as a manager, compared to what I do today. And what I'm getting at is that the biggest difference is I consume, I would say, at least 1,000 times more information in a day's time today than I did then. But I'm also a lot more productive, than what I was then, because technology has allowed us to do that. Excuse me. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today. How can people find out more about you?
Go to mentorproject.org, deborahheiser.com, and you can find me, learn more about me through the book, The Mentorship Edge.
Awesome. And we will add some links in the show notes to the books and to the website so everybody can easily find it. But we appreciate so much hearing what you had to say and kind of how psychology and leadership can intersect. And personally, I think it's awesome what you guys are doing with students and trying to make sure that we're mentoring those students. For our listeners, until next time, check us out on the web at McCoyLeadership.com. Check out our social media, and we'll see you on the next round. Thanks.